Forget random break-ins. Imagine finding footprints in the snow that lead right up to your house, but none leading away. You know the killer is already inside. This is the horrifying true story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, where an entire family was slaughtered in cold blood on a remote Bavarian farm in 1922. And the most terrifying part, the killer might have been living there all along. Before we start, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Belmoze. It helps keep these dark corners of history alive, one chilling story at a time. The Hinterkaifeck farm sat alone in the woods outside the small village of Greiburn, about 40 miles north of Munich. In 1922, it belonged to Andreas Gruber, a stern 63-year-old farmer, and his wife Cecilia, aged 72. Living with them were their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, her two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and a maid named Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived for her first day of work. Within hours of her arrival, every one of them would be dead. But the horror didn't start that night. It started days earlier, with signs that something was terribly wrong. Andreas Gruber was not an imaginative man. He was hard, practical, and known in the village for his temper as much as his discipline. So when he came into town a few days before the murders, shaken and pale, people listened. He told his neighbors that he'd found strange footprints in the snow behind his barn. They led from the dark edge of the forest straight up to his back door, but there were no footprints leading back. The trail stopped at the threshold. He said he had heard footsteps in the attic at night. The sounds were deliberate. Not rats, not wind, footsteps. Someone was walking above them. He searched the house and found nothing. Then he discovered that one of his house keys was missing. It would have been easy to dismiss it all as paranoia if it hadn't been for what happened next. The family's newspaper, one that none of them subscribed to, appeared inside the house as if someone had brought it there. And on the farm, tools and belongings seemed to move from their usual places. A set of footprints appeared in the barn that no one could explain. The Grubers told neighbors about these things, but they didn't leave. It was 1922. Germany was still reeling from the aftermath of the First World War. Inflation was rising, money was worthless, and the countryside was restless. The idea of leaving a farm, even one haunted by something unseen, meant losing everything. So the family stayed, trying to pretend the unease was just imagination. But people in the village noticed the tension. Victoria, Andreas's daughter, had confided to a few friends that she felt unsafe. There were rumors of a long, dark history within the Gruber household, rumors of abuse, of incest, of secrets buried under the silence of rural life. But no one could imagine that any of it would end in slaughter. Then, in late March, Andreas Gruber went into the barn to feed the animals. The snow was still thick, the air bitter. Inside the barn, he heard something or someone. What happened next is one of the most enduring mysteries in European crime history. Investigators believe that whoever killed the Gruber family lured them to the barn, one by one. Andreas went first. Then his wife followed, perhaps after hearing a sound. Then Victoria. Then the little girl Cecilia. Each was struck with a mattock or axe blows to the head, so violent that some skulls were split open. The killer covered each body with hay, almost gently, as if tucking them in. Back inside the farmhouse, the murderer killed the maid, Maria, likely moments after she arrived, still unpacking her things. Then he went to the nursery and killed little Joseph in his crib. But the story doesn't end there because the killer stayed. When neighbors went to check on the Grubers days later, they found the farm eerily quiet. The animals had been fed, smoke had been seen rising from the chimney, someone had milked the cows, bread had been baked. Whoever killed them had lived in the house with their bodies for days, moving through the same rooms, eating their food, sleeping under their roof. And that's what makes the story of Hinterkaifeck so chilling. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was patience. It was presence. It was someone who knew the family well enough, for long enough to live among them, unnoticed. Standing outside the farmhouse now, the scene seems almost ordinary fields, woods, a path winding toward what used to be the barn. But in 1922, that quiet isolation became the perfect cover for horror. The investigation that followed uncovered more questions than answers. The footprints leading to the farm remained unexplained. The missing key was never found. There were no signs of forced entry. And yet, the family had clearly been watched perhaps for weeks. Some villagers said they'd seen a strange figure lurking near the woods in the days before the murders. Others remembered hearing distant screams at night, but dismissed them as foxes. No one imagined that 6 people had been killed in a single night and that the killer had simply stayed there afterward. Calm, deliberate, and invisible. The police found evidence that someone had used the fireplace recently. The bed was warm, food had been eaten, even the dog had been fed. Whoever it was didn't flee in panic. They waited until the right moment and then disappeared into the forest as quietly as they had come. The case shocked Germany. Hundreds of suspects were questioned: farmhands, drifters, even Victoria's rumored lover, but no one was ever convicted. Over the years, theories multiplied: a vagrant, a jealous neighbor, a revenge killing, even a supernatural explanation. But none fit all the details. The footprints, the missing key, the attic noises, all of it pointed to something stranger, something intimate. To this day, the murders at Hinterkaifeck remain unsolved. The farm was eventually demolished, but the story refuses to fade. It lingers like the footsteps in the snow, leading only one way and never returning. That's the horror of Hinterkaifeck. Not just the brutality of the crime, but the silence that surrounded it. A family watched, a home invaded, a killer who waited, and somewhere between the attic and the barn, something beyond understanding moved through those rooms, quietly reminding the living that even the safest home can become a place of dread. On the cold night of March 31st, 1922, the quiet isolation of the Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria was shattered. What happened there remains one of the most chilling mysteries in German history. The Gruber family's home, an unassuming rural farmhouse surrounded by fields and Woodsby, became the stage for one of Europe's most brutal and inexplicable crimes. The killer, or killers, didn't rush or panic. The attack was deliberate, measured, and disturbingly intimate. It wasn't the work of a thief or a passing vagrant. It was something far darker. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch of the family, was known for his strict, often harsh temperament. His wife Chiselia lived under his shadow, quiet and devout. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, had returned to the farm after being widowed, bringing along her 2 young children, 7-year-old Chiselia and 2-year-old Joseph. They lived a difficult, closed-off life. Neighbors thought of them as strange but hard-working, bound together by stubborn pride and rural isolation. Their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had arrived only hours before the murders. Her first night on the farm would also be her last. The attack began in the barn, under the faint light of an oil lamp. The killer lured Andreas, his wife, and Victoria out one by one. No one knows what drew them there. Perhaps strange noises from the animals, perhaps the sound of someone moving among the hay. Each was struck in the head with a mattock, a type of pickaxe kept for farm work. The blows were precise and fatal, delivered with such force that the skulls of some victims split open. The killer seemed to have known the layout of the property well, enough to use the barn's seclusion to muffle the sounds of violence. It's believed Andreas was attacked first. He was a strong man, though aging, and his body showed signs of defensive wounds. He fought back, but it didn't matter. The killer's strikes were fast and deliberate, each aimed to kill. His wife came next, followed by Victoria. There was no screaming heard by neighbors, no sign of panic. Each victim was ambushed and silenced before they could warn the others. The attack was not chaotic, it was controlled, almost methodical, like the killer had rehearsed it in their mind. After the 3 adults in the barn were dead, the killer turned toward the farmhouse. Inside, young Chiselia was awake. Evidence later suggested she witnessed at least part of the crime. When her body was found, clumps of her own hair were torn from her scalp, likely from terror and shock. She had been alive long enough after the attack to pull it out before finally succumbing to her injuries. 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his cot, a single blow ending his short life. The maid, Maria, was struck last. Her body found neatly covered in her bed in the maid's room, as if the killer had taken a moment to hide what they had done. The brutality of the crime contrasted with its eerie calm. There were no signs of theft. The family's valuables, money, and food were untouched. Whoever did this wasn't there for material gain. The bodies in the barn were covered with hay afterward, suggesting a disturbing composure. The murderer didn't flee immediately. Evidence showed that someone stayed on the farm for several days after the killings. Neighbors saw smoke rising from the chimney. The animals were fed. Bread was taken from the pantry. Footprints led to and from the attic. It was as if the killer had made themselves at home, surrounded by the dead. When neighbors eventually grew suspicious after, the family missed church, and Victoria's daughter didn't appear at school, they went to investigate. They found the farm unnervingly quiet. Inside the barn, under the hay, they discovered the first bodies. Then, one by one, they found the rest. The crime scene was grotesque and confusing. Police officers who arrived from Munich struggled to process what they saw. There was no forced entry, no signs of robbery, and no clear motive. It was as if the killer had come and gone like a ghost. But not everything was invisible. Investigators found signs that the murderer had been hiding on the property before the attack. Weeks earlier, the family had complained of hearing footsteps in the attic, though they could never find anyone when they checked. A newspaper from Munich none of them had bought was found in the house. Keys went missing. Strange footprints appeared in the snow leading toward the house but not away from it. Andreas Gruber told neighbors about these strange events, but no one believed him. They thought he was being paranoid. Now, those stories seemed like a warning, ignored too late. The detail that haunts the case most is the stillness of the days following the murders. Someone tended to the animals, someone ate meals in the kitchen, someone slept under the same roof where 6 corpses lay. It's not known whether this was part of a ritual, a delusion, or simply an attempt to maintain control over the scene. But it indicates something: Terrafinja, murderer who was comfortable there, familiar with the routine, and patient enough to linger among the dead. Forensic analysis of the time was primitive by modern standards, but even then, police could tell the attack had required strength and precision. The angle of the blows suggested the killer was right-handed and taller than most of the victims. The weapon, the mattock, belonged to the family. It was later found, cleaned, and replaced in its usual spot. That act alone reveals a chilling calm. The killer didn't rush or fear discovery. They had time. Many theories have emerged over the years. Some say it was a vagrant, others a disgruntled worker, or a relative seeking revenge. Some believe it was someone close to Victoria who was rumored to have had forbidden relationships that sparked jealousy or shame. One of the most disturbing theories suggests that Andreas himself might have been abusive toward his daughter, and that the crime was revenge for long-hidden sins. But none of these explanations account for the quiet precision of the killings or the eerie behavior that followed. The possibility that the killer had lived in the attic before the murders haunts the story most. Imagine the sound of quiet breathing above the ceiling, the creak of a floorboard when everyone else is asleep. The family would have gone about their days unaware that someone was watching them, listening to their conversations, observing their habits, waiting for the perfect night to strike. The attic was the perfect hiding place, remote, dry, and accessible through the barn. Whoever stayed there could move around at night, unseen, familiarizing themselves with every corner of the farmhouse. That's what makes Hinterkaifeck different from other murders. It wasn't just a killing, it was an invasion that lasted for days, maybe weeks. The killer didn't come from the outside world. They were already inside. The sense of safety that the Grubers must have felt in their rural isolation was the very thing that doomed them. They believed no one could reach them out there, but someone had not only reached them, they had lived among them. When the police finally cleared the property, the house remained standing for a time, but the locals couldn't bear its presence. People claimed to hear footsteps inside long after it was abandoned. Tools went missing. Doors creaked open by themselves. The animals refused to go near the barn. Eventually, in 1923, the farmhouse was demolished. The land plowed over as if to erase the memory of what happened there. But the horror of that night never disappeared. The night of the pickaxe wasn't a moment of regret, was a ritual of control and silence. 6 lives ended without a single scream heard beyond those walls. The killer knew every movement, every path, every door that creaked. And even after the killing was done, they lingered, eating, resting, watching. Hinterkaifeck became more than a crime scene. It became a symbol of how evil can slip into the ordinary, how danger can live just above your head without ever making a sound. The attic, the quiet, and the pickaxe, they form a trinity of dread that still unsettles anyone who studies the case. The horror wasn't only in the violence, but in the patience. Whoever did this didn't kill to escape or steal. They killed to dominate. They killed because they could. And when the night was done, they stayed listening to the wind move across the Bavarian fields, knowing that no one would find them until it was far too late. There's something worse than a murder. It's realizing the killer stayed afterward. Date your food, slept in your bed, and tended your fire as if nothing had happened. That's what makes Hinterkaifeck not just a crime, but a nightmare. The killer didn't run. He stayed for dinner. Before we go deeper, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Belmoze. It helps us keep exploring the places where history crosses into the unthinkable. By the time neighbors grew concerned about the Gruber family, nearly a week had passed since anyone had seen them. The farm sat quiet in the late March cold. The smoke from the chimney was still rising. The cattle lowed restlessly in the barn. The postman had delivered letters and found them unclean. A young girl who went to school with little Chiselia noticed she hadn't come to class. The family's maid, Maria, hadn't been seen either. On April 4th, a group of villagers decided to check on the farm. What they found became one of the most haunting crime scenes in European history. In the barn lay Forebodes Andreas, his wife Chiselia, their daughter Victoria, and her young daughter. Each had been struck in the head with a pickaxe or mattock. The killer had covered their bodies with hay and boards. Inside the house, in the maid's quarters, they found Maria's body. In the nursery, 2-year-old Joseph lay dead in his cot. But the strangest discovery wasn't the murders themselves. It was what had happened afterward. Investigators and neighbors quickly realized that someone had been living on the farm for several days following the killings. The livestock had been fed, the cows had been milked, fresh bread had been baked in the kitchen. The fireplace still held warm ashes, and the embers suggested someone had tended it regularly. Even the family dog, a large and loyal animal, had been fed and moved around the property. This wasn't panic, this wasn't flight. Whoever the killer was, he had been calm, deliberate, and disturbingly comfortable. Imagine that scene, 6 bodies in various stages of decomposition in the cold spring air, the stench slowly spreading through the farmhouse. And yet, somewhere in that silence, the murderer sat by the fire, eating the family's food, listening to the crackling of wood, perhaps hearing footsteps that were only his own. Police examined the evidence and agreed the killer hadn't simply hidden after the murders. He had lived there. He had slept in their beds. He had used the stove, eaten their meals, and cared for their animals as if he had taken over their lives. Some witnesses even claimed to have seen smoke rising from the chimney days after the family was already dead. One of the most disturbing details came from the farmhand who had delivered feed to the property. He reported that the animals had been tended to with care. Their stalls were clean, and the cows showed no signs of distress. Whoever had taken over the farm knew exactly how to handle livestock. That meant the killer wasn't just familiar with the farm, he was likely familiar with this farm. It's this part of the story that turns Hinterkaifeck from horror into obsession. It wasn't a transient crime, it was occupation. The killer didn't strike and flee. He lived among the dead, carrying out their routines, inhabiting their world as though the murders were just another chore on the farm's endless list of duties. Inside the farmhouse, investigators found evidence of meals prepared after the killings. A slab of smoked meat was cut and eaten. Breadcrumbs littered the table. A lamp had been cleaned and refueled. There were signs that someone had sat there in the dark, alone, listening to the creaking wood of a house that was no longer a home. Neighbors later recalled that the farm's dog had barked wildly the night of the murders, then gone quiet. Days later, when they arrived, the animal was tied up in the barn, exhausted but alive. It had clearly been fed. That single fact disturbed investigators more than almost anything else. It proved the killer had remained long enough and calm enough to maintain even the smallest domestic details. The investigation showed no signs of forced entry, no robbery, no frantic escape. In fact, nothing of value had been taken. The killer had no interest in money or possessions. This wasn't a crime of greed, it was personal, intimate. Someone had known this family well enough to move around their space without fear. Someone who could milk the cows, find food, light fires, and stay invisible. There were reports that neighbors had noticed smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney on the Sunday and Monday following the murders. They assumed the family was still alive. One child even claimed to have seen a figure moving near the barn, though no one could ever confirm it. When the search party finally entered, it was as if they had stepped into a ghost's daily routine chores. Done, meals eaten, the air filled with quiet order, except for the dead. Forensics in 1922 were primitive, but the details they gathered painted a chilling picture. The bodies in the barn had been killed first, covered carefully with straw and wood. The maid and the baby were killed last. The bedding in some of the rooms was disturbed, as if someone had slept there afterward. candles had been burned, the killer had not just survived there, he had lived there. Andreas Gruber's reputation in the village was complicated. He was respected as a farmer, but disliked as a man. Harsh, controlling, and rumored to have had an abusive relationship with his daughter Victoria, he made enemies easily. But none of that explained the level of intimacy this crime required. Whoever committed it knew the rhythms of the house, the sounds, the chores, the layout. They knew when to move, when to strike, and when to stay still. The more investigators examined the case, the clearer it became that the killer was just hiding in the house before the murders. He was comfortable enough afterward to linger without fear of discovery. It's possible he even wanted to be found. Some theorize that the killer remained on the farm to relive the act, to exert control one final time. Others believe he stayed out of necessity, stranded by his own isolation. There's something deeply psychological about that decision to stay. A typical killer runs, they flee from guilt, from witnesses, from consequence. But this one didn't. This one treated the aftermath like an extension of the crime itself, feeding the animals, maintaining the fire, and sleeping under the same roof as the corpses wasn't just practicality, it was ritual. Even decades later, when forensic experts re-examined the records, they couldn't explain the behavior. It wasn't consistent with robbery or revenge, it was consistent with obsession, a kind of familiarity that blurred the line between hunter and inhabitant. The quiet horror of Hinterkaifeck lies not just in what was done, but in what was endured. For 3 days, the murderer walked the same floors, tended the same barn, and sat in the same silence the victims once knew. The footprints leading from the forest had stopped at the farm's door. They never left. In that detail, the prints that entered but never exited lies the essence of the entire mystery. The killer came from the woods, from the cold, from the dark, and for a few days, he belonged to the house. To this day, the thought of those quiet days between the murders and the discovery haunts anyone who studies the case, because somewhere in that isolated farmhouse, surrounded by death and silence, a stranger found the calm to live like one of them. Even after one of the most exhaustive investigations in German history, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain a mystery that defies all logic and understanding. The most disturbing part isn't just the brutality of the crime the complete lack of a clear motive. 6 people were murdered in their home, including 2 children, yet nothing was stolen, no message was left, and no confession ever came. The money in the house was untouched. Jewelry, tools, and valuables sat where they always had. Whoever did this wasn't driven by greed or impulse. It was something personal, something psychological, something that can't be explained by ordinary violence. When police from Munich arrived at the farm, they expected to find a robbery gone wrong. That was the most common motive for rural murders at the time. But within hours, that theory fell apart. The Gruber's cash, around 700 marks, was found hidden in a kitchen drawer. Victoria's gold jewelry was untouched. Even food and livestock were left undisturbed. Whoever stayed after the killings wasn't trying to cover up a theft. They were living there comfortably, cooking meals, feeding animals, and sleeping under the same roof as the corpses. It was behavior that made no sense to trained investigators, and it still doesn't today. Detectives quickly began to suspect that the crime had emotional roots. The pattern of violence was personal, intimate. Even the victims weren't shot from afar or killed randomly. They were beaten one after another with a tool that required closeness and force. The weapon of choice isn't just convenient, it was deliberate. It's a tool used for heavy digging or breaking soil, an instrument that takes both strength and patience to wield. The killer didn't bring it with them. They took it from the farm itself, suggesting familiarity with the property. The more investigators learned about the family, the stranger the picture became. Andreas Gruber was known for being harsh and controlling. He had a reputation for cruelty and isolation. Rumors spread that his relationship with his daughter Victoria was deeply inappropriate. Local gossip claimed that he had fathered her youngest child, Joseph. Though official records listed Victoria's deceased husband as the father, the authorities had even charged Andreas and Victoria with incest years earlier. They served short jail sentences, but returned to the farm afterward, continuing their lives as though nothing had happened. These dark family secrets led police to consider whether the murders were an act of revenge or punishment for sins that the public only whispered about. One of the main suspects was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former friend of the family. He had been romantically involved with Victoria at one point and believed himself to be the father of little Joseph. He had proposed marriage to her, but Andreas reportedly forbade it, fearing the scandal it might bring. Lorenz's relationship with the family soured after that. After the murders, he was one of the first people to enter the farmhouse and discover the bodies. Some witnesses claimed his behavior was strange to calm to methodical. He unlocked doors easily, moved through the house without hesitation, and seemed to know his way around. When asked how he could remain so composed, he allegedly said he was looking for his son, Joseph. Many thought that was an odd way to describe a child he had no legal claim to. Police investigated Lorenz thoroughly. His motive was plausible: jealousy, rejection, or revenge. But there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. The murder weapon bore no fingerprints. The footprints leading to the house and stopping there could have been anyone's, and despite the rumors, no one saw him near the farm that night. He was questioned repeatedly over the years, even decades later, but he was never charged. He lived the rest of his life under suspicion, haunted by whispers of Hinterkaifeck. As the investigation expanded, it drew in hundreds of leads. Farmers, soldiers, drifters, anyone who might have had reason to hate Andreas or who had passed through the area was questioned. Detectives even exhumed the victims' heads and sent them to Munich for forensic analysis, hoping that new methods might reveal something the crime scene hadn't. But the lab burned down during World War II, and the evidence was lost forever. Whatever secrets those skulls might have held disappeared in the flames. The case files revealed that what unsettled investigators most was the strange quietness that followed the crime. Normally, killers in rural areas fled quickly, fearing discovery. But the person at Hinterkaifeck stayed. The fire in the kitchen stove was kept burning. Meals were eaten. Fresh hay was laid out for the cows. Even the family dog, left chained in the barn, was fed. Neighbors later said they saw smoke rising from the chimney, days after the murders. That detail is what turned the case from a simple tragedy into a horror story. It suggested that the killer didn't just want the family dead, they wanted to inhabit their lives, even if only for a few days. It also meant something psychological was at play. The killer wasn't acting out of panic or necessity. This was about control. Staying on the property wasn't logical, it was emotional, maybe even ritualistic. It's as if the killer wanted to erase the line between themselves and the victims, to become part of the house, part of the family they destroyed. The longer they stayed, the deeper the mystery grew. There were other strange details too. Footprints in the snow led from the forest to the farm, but none led back. A set of house keys vanished before the crime and were never found. Doors that were normally locked had been left open. The family dog barked constantly in the nights before the murders, but no one could find what it was barking at. It's easy to imagine the fear inside that farmhouse, the unease of knowing someone might be watching from the darkness, or even from inside the walls. Investigators wondered whether the killer was hiding in the attic, as Andreas had reported hearing footsteps up there in the weeks before. No one believed him at the time, thinking it was just nerves or imagination. But when police examined the attic after the murders, they found signs that someone had been living there. Straw bedding, disturbed dust, and crumbs suggested that the space had been used recently. That discovery confirmed the most terrifying theory that the killer had been inside the home before the murders, watching the family, waiting for the right moment to strike. Over the decades, new suspects were proposed, former farmhands with grudges, soldiers traumatized by the First World War, and even traveling tradesmen who vanished afterward. But every lead eventually broke apart. Witnesses died, evidence decayed, and the farm itself was torn down. The land was leveled as if to bury the memory of what had happened. But the mystery never went away. In Germany, Hinterkaifeck became a word that carried unease. It wasn't just a crime, it was a haunting. The lack of motive is what makes it so haunting. If someone kills for money or revenge, you can understand it, even if it's monstrous. But when someone kills without reason, when they stay afterward, feeding animals and sleeping among the corpses, it suggests something far worse, a mind that doesn't follow human logic at all. The killer might have felt justified in ways we can't comprehend, or maybe they felt nothing at all. The official investigation was eventually closed, but every detective who touched the case admitted privately that it disturbed them. It wasn't just unsolved, it was unknowable. There was no confession, no clear timeline, and no sense of closure. The killer seemed to vanish into the same woods from which the footprints came. Even with modern forensic methods, experts say it would still be difficult to solve today. Too much time has passed, too much evidence lost. All that remains are theories and a lingering unease that whoever committed the crime was someone the victims already knew. That's what makes the Hinterkaifeck murders so terrifying. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. It wasn't a stranger passing through. It was something far more intimate and psychological, an act born from obsession, resentment, or madness. And when it was over, the murderer didn't flee into the night. They stayed. They lived with what they'd done. They ate the family's food, tended their animals, and slept in their beds. No money stolen, no revenge note, no explanation. Just silence and snow around a farmhouse that became a tomb. The horror of Hinterkaifeck lies not only in what happened, but in what we'll never know. The motive died with the victims. And the only person who could have explained it walked away into the darkness without leaving a single track behind. The Hinterkaifeck murders didn't fade with time. They grew darker, heavier, and more tangled the longer people tried to explain them. What happened on that small, isolated Bavarian farm in 1922 still haunts Germany more than a century later. The brutality, the silence, and the simple fact that no one was ever caught turned Hinterkaifeck into something more than a crime scene. It became a symbol, a quiet warning about what hides behind ordinary walls. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Belmoze. It helps keep stories like this alive, the ones history tried to bury but never could. The farmhouse is gone now. It was demolished in 1923, barely a year after the murders. The locals wanted nothing to do with it. They tore it down, burned what they could, and built a small memorial at the edge of the property. But even after the wood was gone and the land was cleared, people said the place still felt wrong. The ground was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. Farmers who worked nearby said their horses shied away from the spot. Visitors felt watched, as though the woods themselves remembered. In the years after the murders, police continued to investigate. They questioned hundreds of people, neighbors, drifters, war veterans, former employees. They collected tools, letters, and diaries, but every clue led nowhere. There was never a confession, never a trial, never a closure. Theories multiplied until the line between fact and legend blurred. One theory centered on Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had once been close to Victoria, Andreas Gruber's daughter. Some said he was in love with her. Others whispered that he was the father of her youngest child, Joseph. The village was small. Everyone knew everyone's secrets, or thought they did. Lorenz was among the first to discover the bodies, and his behavior during that discovery made people uneasy. He seemed strangely calm. He unlocked the door with a key one, eerily similar to the one Andreas Gruber had reported missing before the murders. Some claimed he returned to the scene later and fed the animals himself. Whether that was guilt, familiarity, or something else entirely, no one ever proved. Another theory pointed to a vagrant or escaped prisoner, someone passing through who stumbled upon the remote farm and found opportunity. But that idea didn't hold. There was too much care, too much knowledge in how the killer moved around the property. This wasn't random violence. Whoever did it understood the rhythms of the place. They knew the Grubers' habits, the layout of the barn, even how to tend livestock. Some investigators speculated it was a revenge killing, someone wronged by Andreas Gruber's harshness. He was known as difficult, even cruel. There were whispers about his control over Victoria, about years of abuse that may have created enemies close to home. But again, no one could prove motive or opportunity. Everyone in the village had theories, no one had answers. Decades later, when forensic science had advanced, German criminologists re-examined the evidence. They studied the old photographs, the autopsy notes, and the witness testimonies. They found inconsistencies, timelines that didn't fit, descriptions that changed, and details lost to time. In 2007, the Bavarian Police Academy reopened the case files as a training exercise, hoping to apply modern profiling techniques. The final report concluded that the case could, in theory, be solved, but the evidence had long since decayed, the bones buried, the suspects dead. The name of the most likely killer was recorded and sealed in the report, out of respect for surviving family members. It will never be made public, and so the mystery endures. The footprints that led only to the farmhouse, the missing key, the faint sound of footsteps in the attic, the killer who stayed to eat and sleep among the dead. Each piece feels like a fragment of a story that was almost told, but never finished. For true crime historians, Hinterkaifeck represents a turning point, the moment where the rational ends and something colder begins. The idea that evil could be patient, that violence could be methodical, quiet, and purposeful. There was no madness here, no outburst. It was precision, a slow, deliberate act carried out by someone who didn't need to run because they already belonged to the place. The farmhouse itself has taken on mythic weight in German folklore. People say that on winter nights, when the snow falls thick and the woods go silent, you can still see footprints leading toward where the old path once ran. Just one set leading to the spot where the house used to stand and stopping there. The true horror of Hinterkaifeck isn't just in the violence, it's in the intimacy. The killer was close enough to know the sounds of the family's movements, the timing of their chores, the way they slept, close enough to live with them before and after death. The farmhouse stood alone, surrounded by fields and trees. The nearest neighbor was nearly a kilometer away. Isolation was normal there. But what the Grubers didn't realize was that isolation works both ways. It protects you from the world, and it protects the world from whatever happens to you inside it. No one heard the screams. No one came for 3 days afterward. The farm carried on, as if nothing had changed. That's what continues to disturb those who study the case, the silence. No sign of panic, no forced entry, no stolen goods, just a family erased from existence, methodically in one night, and a stranger who stayed behind to keep their world running. Even the investigators who handled the case couldn't forget it. Many described feeling an oppressive dread at the farm. The police chief later admitted he couldn't sleep for weeks. The images of the covered bodies, the frozen fields, and the quiet kitchen haunted him for the rest of his life. When he retired, he refused to discuss it again. Hinterkaifeck became a ghost story told by real people. The name itself, taken from the nearby hamlet of Kaifeck, means behind Kaifeck, a place that's not on the map, but somewhere just beyond it. That feels fitting, because this story has always lived behind the surface of explanation, just out of reach, in the part of human nature that finds fear not in monsters, but in the people who know how to wait. Even now, more than 100 years later, the case still draws investigators, writers, and historians who try to solve it with new theories, new tools, and new hopes. But every theory eventually hits the same wall. Whoever did this knew the farm too well to leave behind a mistake. They didn't need to vanish into legend. They simply walked away when the time came, leaving the story itself to do the haunting. The land is quiet now. Only the memorial cross remains, standing in the middle of an open field, surrounded by wind and grass. Visitors still come, standing where the barn once stood, reading the names carved into the stone. Some say the air feels heavy there, others say it feels like nothing at all. But the legend of Hinterkaifeck doesn't rest. It lingers in that idea, the notion that the greatest horrors aren't committed by strangers in the dark, but by those who understand how to live among you without being seen. That's what the farm became, a symbol of hidden terror, the kind that doesn't just kill, but stays behind. And somewhere in the echo of that cold Bavarian wind, it still whispers the same quiet warning. Sometimes, the danger isn't coming from the woods. It's already inside the house.